Hi, welcome to Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and today's video is part of a series I do where I compare books with their movie adaptations. And through these videos, I discuss why the majority of the time, when it comes to the book versus movie, the book wins. Now, having said that, I enjoy watching movies just as much as I enjoy reading books. Like, I love both. So I do give unbiased reviews of both book and movie, I think, for the most part. I also wanted to let you know that this is available as a podcast. And so these tend to be about 30 minutes long, but especially for ones that go over that, if it just works better for you to listen to it as a podcast, they are available. So just search Why the Book Wins in whatever podcasting platform you use. I will also link to them down below for Spotify and Google Podcast. For Spotify and Apple Podcasts, because those are the ones most people use. So yeah, if you would rather do that, those are available too. And before we get into this video, I do want to say that there will be spoilers for both the book and the movie. So if you plan on reading the book or watching the movie and do not want it spoiled, then go do that first and then come back and watch this video. And I guess that about wraps it up as far as intro stuff. Aside from, I would love it if you subscribe to my channel if you love book-related content, and I share my book collection of vintage books and special edition books like Easton Press and Folio Society and all that stuff. So if you're into books or movies, but definitely I think my channel leans more towards books, but I might get more into movies as time goes on, but for now I'm leaning more towards books. Anyway, if that interests you, you should definitely subscribe to my channel. And yeah, without further ado, let's get right into today's video. Hi, welcome back to Why the Book Wins. Today I'm talking about Cold Mountain, which is a book written by Charles Frazier, published in 1997. And then the movie by the same name was directed by Anthony Minghella, and it was released in 2003. So before I get into this video, I wanted to say thank you to Chris. So he is a listener and he reached out to me and recommended this. And I knew this was a movie, but I didn't realize it was based on a book and it just wasn't on my radar. So I appreciate him suggesting it because I probably wouldn't have covered it otherwise, and I really ended up enjoying it. If you have a request for a book and movie topic, I would love to get your request. There's been a few, like a couple people have requested The Road, and I have it on my list, but I have not gotten around to it yet, as well as someone requested Love, Rosie, and I still haven't gotten around to that one. So it might be a while because I'm bad at sticking to my reading calendar, but I do want to release content that people are interested in and wanting. So I definitely appreciate your recommendations and your requests. So my thoughts on the book. This book was just beautifully written, and I could see some people saying that they thought it just moved too slow, which is a common complaint that I could see on Goodreads. However, I don't know, I just really enjoyed being in the story. It's just so descriptive. And I just loved hearing about Inman and Ada's the separate journeys they were on. And I felt so in it, and so I was never bored per se. Although it took me until I was like halfway. Actually, I read this on my Kindle, and so it was 40% because Kindle gives you a percentage. Anyway, it wasn't until I was like 40% of the way through that I really started to care. Like the first 40% I was enjoying, but I wasn't super invested in the characters maybe. So yeah, around 40%. So it took a little while, I guess, even though I was enjoying it, it took a little while for me to really be invested. And also around that time is when I realized that this is a retelling of the Odyssey. And so having, being able to frame the story and the fact that it's a version of the Odyssey also made me appreciate it a bit more, I think. You could see what Frazier was going for and the purpose behind some of the scenes. But yeah, the writing in this is so vivid, and there were times where I was reading this and like the world just fell away and I was just like there with Ada or Inman, just like so immersed in the story. And when a book can have that like magical transporting effect, like that's pretty awesome. And I think that takes a lot of talent to be able to do that to someone when they're reading, And I love sharing quotes from the books I cover. It just helps give you a feel for the writing, I guess. And the one I'm going to share for this might seem kind of random, but I don't know. I just really love this section I'm going to read. And it talks about two different events and like the contrast between the two. And yeah, this is just a section that really stood out to me. So this is what I'm going to read. Oh, and to set the scene. So Inman comes across a mama bear and her cub, And the mama bear ends up dying, and so then he's alone with this cub. To his credit, Inman could imagine reaching up and grabbing the cub by the scruff of its neck and saying, "We're kin." Then taking his knapsack off and thrusting the cub in with only its head sticking out. Then putting the pack back on and walking away, the bear looking out from his new perspective, as bright-eyed as a papoose. Give it to Ada as a pet. Or if she turned him away, he might raise it to be a part-tame bear, and then when full-grown, it might stop by his hermit cabin on Cold Mountain now and again for company. Bring its wife and children, so that in years to come, Inman could have an animal family, if no other. That would be one way this dead bear calamity might be rectified. What Inman did, though, was all he could do. He picked up the gun and shot the cub in the head and watched it pause as its grip on the tree failed and it fell to the ground. So yeah, all in all, even though this book maybe took me a while to really feel invested and to feel attached to the characters, I still loved it and I would highly recommend it. There are a lot of tangents that we go on because the different people Inman and Ada meet, we hear their backstory. And so maybe I could see some people being bored and being this person's story isn't relevant to the book, so why are we getting it? But I had never felt that way, and I enjoyed all the side tangents and side stories that we heard, and I would assume some of them are reflective of the Odyssey, but I'm not quite sure. I will add, though, I don't know, I feel like it's an elephant in the room when you're talking about white people who lived in the South when there was slavery going on, right? Because we're supposed to be liking these characters and rooting for them. Meanwhile, they're totally okay with slavery. And Ada, in the movie, it shows that they have slaves. But in the book, I don't specifically remember that. Maybe she did. But yeah, and then Inman, whether or not he had slaves, he chose to fight to keep slavery. And so it's just, I don't know. I kind of have a hard time with that sometimes because it kind of puts a damper on the story to some extent because you just have that going in your the back of your mind, right? And the movie definitely goes to lengths to show that, Inman didn't believe in this war and he didn't believe in the cause he was fighting for. Well, then why was he fighting? Why didn't he just surrender and agree with the North? I don't know. And then Ada, they make a point to show her taking a drink out to the slaves at one point, but I don't know, trying to make them good slave owners. Which again, I'm judging people 200 years ago and times were very different. But again, I don't know. Yeah, I just felt like I needed to acknowledge that because it was in the back of my mind as I read this book. And I'm sure other people maybe don't like the book because it's portraying these people. Not that they're all terrible people. I don't know. But then again, how could you own slaves and not be terrible? I don't know. I just felt like I needed to address that fact and my conflicted emotions about it. But yeah, anyway, and now we will move on to the movie. Lately, it seems like a lot of movies I'm watching for the podcast just end up being so long. And this was another one that was 2.5 hours long. And so when I saw that, I was just man, why can't one of these movies only be 90 minutes? Which, I don't know, I'm a big movie person, so length usually doesn't bother me. But lately, it just feels like all these movies are so long. Having said that, this movie flew by, so I never once felt bored. So that's always a good sign when 2.5 hours can go by very quickly. And the movie is very true to the book, so there won't be a ton of differences to talk about because, yeah, the movie is a very faithful adaptation. But on to the acting, we have Jude Law as Inman, and I'm neutral about Jude Law, I guess, as an actor. He's fine. And yeah, he was good as Inman, which is funny because this is based in America, this story. And yet, a lot of the main actors aren't American. So I always think that's kind of funny, which I haven't given a summary for this. So if you want a summary, super brief, Inman is a soldier fighting for the Confederate Army. And after 4 years, he decides to leave. And he makes his trek home to Ada, a woman who he was courting, but he really doesn't know that well. But they've been maintaining a relationship kind of through letters. And so he decides to make his way back home to Cold Mountain and to Ada. Meanwhile, Ada is learning how to live on her own on this farm because she's a city woman and now she's here trying to live. And a woman named Ruby comes to help her and the two of them form a bond and they create a successful farm together, essentially is what it's about. Anyway, Nicole Kidman plays Ada, and I thought she was well cast. She plays, she definitely is perfectly cast in the part of a woman who is, a well-to-do city lady who suddenly is having to learn how to fend for herself. So she's very fitting for that role. And her southern accent did annoy me in the beginning, but then over time, I guess I just got used to it. Renee Zellweger won like every award there was for her role as Ruby. And yeah, I thought she did a really good job portraying this character, you know, who is tough and has been through a lot, but, you know, has the heart of gold and helps Ada run this farm. Brendan Gleeson is a great actor, and he is wonderful as Ruby's father, Stobrod. Philip Seymour Hoffman is in the brief role of VC, and he serves as like the comic relief until his character is shot dead. But yeah, he was good in this. Natalie Portman is in the brief role of Sara, and she actually auditioned for the role of Ada, and I think she would have been a wonderful Ada. However, at the time, she did look too young. She was like 22, but looked like she was a teenager still, kind of. And so I feel like she probably just would have looked too young for the part, even though she's incredible, and had she been a bit older, she would have been perfect for Ada. So as far as the people Inman meets on his journey, the movie includes like all of the major events and the major interactions, I guess, that he has while he's on his way. Some events might be shuffled around, and we might not get as much backstory with some characters as we did in the book, but yeah, overall, like the main events that happen with him are in the movie. And I thought I would list the events and the people Inman meets because, like, it would be cool to do an in-depth comparison of Cold Mountain and the Odyssey. But I have not yet read the Odyssey. I'm just aware of the story. And so I thought I would list the events that happen with Inman, and maybe anyone who has read the Odyssey or who knows about it, you know, you could comment down below and let me know which events parallel someone from the Odyssey. So for starters, we have the blind man that Inman meets and talks to outside of the hospital, and this blind man is kind of what spurs him to decide to leave. And I read that the blind man might be a representation of Homer himself, is what I read. And then we have the young woman who takes him across the river. In the movie, so in both book and movie, they are shot at by the home guard. And in the movie, she dies, but in the book, she lives, and they just have to swim to shore. Then we have VC, the Reverend, who, when Inman meets him, he is going to toss this woman in the river because she is pregnant with his child, and then Inman stops him. And later they run into each other again, and VC kind of decides to just join Inman on his journey, even though Inman doesn't really like VC, but he also feels like he can't really stop him from following him, and so they just kind of pair up. And then in the book, this isn't in the movie, but in the book they also like go to like a brothel type place, and then VC, I believe, starts kind of like a fight, and guns are drawn. However, things are de-escalated and no one is hurt. Then we have Junior, who is in the movie, and he is trying to get a bull out of the river, and so they help him. And then he takes him back to his home where his wife and all her sisters live. So it's all these women, and they're drinking this alcohol that's just, the homemade moonshine that's just very strange tasting. And this scene in the book is when I was just like not understanding the point of it, kind of. And then it clicked for me, and I was like, oh, this is like the sirens from the Odyssey. Because in the Odyssey, that's like one of the most famous interactions Odysseus has, is he's like lured to the island with the sirens, where it's these beautiful women, and they have him drinking this strange drink, and it gets him in the haze, and they stay there longer than they mean to. And so I realized that, Junior's house with all these women and the alcohol represents the sirens. And so that's when it all kind of clicked for me. But this is a great scene in the movie though. Like in the beginning, it shows them, and the angle is kind of weird, and it's just showing like, I don't know, not that it's chaos, but just like the distortion caused by the alcohol. And then there's like this eerie music going along with the music they're playing. And you have Junior, who is played by, I didn't write his name, but Giovanni something. And he's got like these crazy eyes while he's dancing. And so, yeah, that was a great scene. But from Junior, it's like Junior turns him into the home guard. However, Inman escapes, although VC is shot. And then we have the woman who has all the goats, and she nurses Inman back to health. And then he comes across Sara with her baby. And then there is the bear that I read about early, which is also not in the movie. And then in the end, Teague and his men find Inman. And even though Inman shoots Teague and some of the others, there's one last guy left, and he's very young. And Inman is like, I don't want to shoot you. Just, let's just part ways and be good. But the kid refuses, and he ends up shooting Inman, basically. And in the movie, this is different because it's not a kid. It's like a full-grown man. And it's a man that we've seen earlier throughout the movie, and he's just kind of weird and pretty cliche as far as bad guys go, I think. Like doing gymnastics and just clearly enjoying being a bad person. Like in the book, this character was just kind of young and foolish, whereas in the movie, he just seemed more evil, I guess. And then, yeah, in the book, we also have people Inman comes across more briefly, and they give him maps, but yeah, so those were shorter interactions. Going in more detail on the people Inman meets, I wanted to talk about Sara. So in the book, he comes across Sara, and it is a young woman. I think she's like 18 or something, and she has a baby, and she has a hog. She invites him in, she's like reluctantly invites him in. And then she has him sleeping outside, but then during the night, she asks him to come inside, and she's like, if I ask you to lay in bed with me, can you like control yourself and we'll just be laying in bed, nothing else? And he says that yes, he can. And so they're laying side by side, and she holds his hand and she starts crying. And then, or I think she holds his hand, maybe not. That might have just been in the movie. But she starts crying, and then she just tells Inman everything she's been through, and then they go back to sleep. And in both book and movie, she wakes him up early in the morning because men are approaching. And in the book, Inman runs off into the forest and watches as the soldiers take away her pig, her hog, and her chickens. And after they leave, Inman chases after them and he kills the men, and then he takes the hog and chickens and brings them back to Sara, and he helps her slaughter the hog, and then by the next day he leaves. In the movie, they add that the baby is sick and it won't breastfeed, and so that's an issue. Whereas in the book, the baby was fine and it was eating. But yeah, Portman, like throughout her whole scene here, like when they're laying in bed and she starts crying, like, man, like she's just so incredible. And her scenes are so dramatic and tragic, and yet she does just an amazing job. And throughout the whole movie, the only times that I teared up, I never teared up when reading the book, but in the movie for Sara's scenes played by Portman, like those are the times that I teared up because she was just incredible. But in the movie, when the soldiers arrive, Inman is in the forest watching. She tells them about her hog, and so they go take the hog, and they have the baby outside. And then once they have the hog, one of the soldiers like attempts to rape Sara, but then Inman stops him. And so Inman kills that guy along with another soldier. And then the last soldier is outside, and Inman tells him that he can leave, basically. And also this soldier is played by Cillian Murphy. But as this soldier is leaving, Sara gets a gun and she shoots him instead. And then in the deleted scenes for this, we learn that her baby, who has been sick this whole time, ends up dying, and then Sara then kills herself. Which I'm glad they deleted this because, one, that's not what happened in the book anyway. And two, that's like just a bit too sad, right? Like her scenes were like tragic enough as it is. Like, we didn't need that added onto it. So I think it was a good call to delete that scene. And then onto Stobrod. For some reason, I have a hard time saying his name. Stobrod. Is it Stobrod? Stobrod? I'll say Stobrod. Anyway, onto Stobrod, who is Ruby's dad. We get more of him from the book, of course, more stories with him. But I think the movie does do a good job like showing who he is. Obviously, he's not like a great character, but he does have a nice arc throughout the course of the story. One difference is that in the movie, Ada says like that he would beat her when she was growing up. Whereas in the book, she complains a lot about him, but she's like, but one thing I can say is that he never laid a hand on me. So that's a difference right there. And early on, the movie has a scene where one of the soldiers is dying, and Inman is with this soldier, and then Stobrod, they have him come in to play his violin, his fiddle, as this man is dying as a way to like ease him into death. And in the book, this didn't happen. Instead, it was a man's daughter who was dying. And so they have him come in to play music for her while she's dying. And the only music he knows are like happy, jovial dancing songs. And it's clearly not appropriate. So he tries to play them, but slower, but it still just is not right. And so the girl eventually is like, why don't you just play your own music? And he says that he's never written his own music. And she's like, well, try. And when he starts creating his own music, like it becomes more emotional and more deeper. And it really is a way for him to just express himself. And then later, when he comes back and is part of the story with Ada and Ruby, he is playing music for them. And like, it's very beautiful and touching. But Ruby kind of brushes it off and won't acknowledge it. Whereas Ada thinks to herself, to Ada, though, it seemed akin to a miracle that Stobrod, of all people, should offer himself up as proof positive that no matter what a waste one has made of one's life, it is ever possible to find some path to redemption, however partial. And in the book and movie, Stobrod had become friends with like a simple-minded man named Pangle, and they had met in the Outliers camp. And then Pangle was drawn to Stobrod because of the music, And then eventually Pangol is able to get a banjo, and turns out he's really good at playing the banjo. And so the two of them become a duo making their music together. And this relationship Stobrod has with Pangol is another thing that like softens up Stobrod as, you know, his story goes on, because he has this like close father-son relationship with this man. And so that kind of softens you up towards him, I guess, with the sweet bond that he has with this man. And Ethan Suplee, I think I'm saying that right, plays Pangol, and he did a really good job. He was in a number of movies in the early 2000s, so you'll definitely recognize him. And in both book and movie, Pangol is shot by Teague. Speaking of Teague, his character is definitely bigger in the movie. So in the movie, he's there like from the start, and he's kind of harassing Ada, and like clearly he's interested in her, but she's waiting for Inman. And yeah, so he's like a big part of the story in that way. And then near the end, when Stobrod and Pangol are with Teague, like one of them, like they find out that Ruby had made the jacket Pangol is wearing, and Stobrod is being like, you know, like leave Ruby and Ada out of this. They have nothing to do with this. Whereas in the book, like Teague never met Ada. He was just this guy with the home guard. Maybe not the home guard. I don't know. But he was searching down deserters. And so people knew who he was, but he never personally knew Ada and Ruby. So they definitely built him up to be more of the villain in the movie and just gave him more screen time. They also had him kill the neighbor Esco and almost kill the wife Sally, because their sons were deserters and they were living at home, and so he kills them. And this did not happen in the book. Another surprising actor in this movie, which by the way, they're like the main cast is like a star-studded cast. But then there's so many side characters that are famous. Maybe they weren't at the time, but they are now. And so there were a lot of people while I was watching this where I was like, whoa, like they're in this too? And one of them isn't even an actor, but a musician, and it is Jack White from The White Stripes. So he plays Georgia in the movie. And his character is a little different because in the movie, it seems like he's been with them for a while. And he's also older than he was in the book, because in the book, Georgia's pretty young. He's like a teenager, I think. So in the movie, he has known them for a while, it seems, and has been with them. Yeah, in the book, though, he was a young teenager who kind of found Stobrod and Pangol, and he wanted their help getting back to Georgia. So he was just with them temporarily. And then in both book and movie, when Pangol and Stobrod are shot, Georgia runs back to Ruby and Ada and tells them what happened. And so then they go out to the mountains to find Stobrod and Pangol. Georgia stays at their house until they come back. And in the movie, like throughout, as soon as we meet Georgia, like he and Ruby are like making eyes at each other, and they'll each be making comments that show that they're interested. And so in the end, when we see that they get together, it's not surprising because we've been getting all these hints that it would happen. Whereas in the book, like I hadn't expected that. But also like I said, he was like a teenager. And so it says how Ruby like basically groomed him into being the kind of man she wanted, which is kind of weird, but I don't know. We flash forward 10 years and they're together and still happy, I guess. But yeah, even though there wasn't anything leading up to us seeing that that was going to happen, like I didn't find it weird or out of place in the book. Like I was fine with it. Ruby is very similar from book to movie. They really stayed true to her character. And again, Zellweger was amazing as her. She really captured that person. And then Ruby is very similar from book to movie. So they really didn't change too much with her. And again, Zellweger really captures that character. And Ruby too, yeah, she's just such a great character. And, you know, she loves Ada and she loves Black Cove, which is the name of their farm. There's a part in the movie where Inman, when they're reunited, Inman asks Ruby, he's like, you know, you're the one I have to get permission from to see if I can stay at Black Cove. And you can see that Ruby is very touched that he acknowledges her and respects her enough to ask permission in this way. That scene was not in the book, but I thought it was a good addition to the movie. And then as far as Inman and Ada's relationship, early in the movie, Ada writes him a letter telling him to come home. And it's this very dramatic, poetic letter telling him to come home to her. And that kind of is what gets him to go home and leave the war. However, in the book, she did write him like a very short note saying something like, you know, come back to me alive or whatever. But he never even got that note. And so in the book, he just leaves because he's just tired of fighting, and he just wants to get home, you know? So it's, you know, he had hopes that Ada would be there for him, but it's not like she had written him this dramatic letter the way she had in the movie. And I liked how the movie acknowledges the fact that Ada and Inman didn't even know each other very well at all. Like, there's a part where he's with the goat woman and he's like kind of feverish. And yeah, he's talking about that, how he's expecting that she's waiting for him when like she doesn't even know him and he doesn't even know her really. And then later at the end when they're reunited once again, a section reads, so Inman says, "You were all that keeps me from sliding into some dark place." Ada, but how did I keep you? We barely knew each other. A few moments. Inman, 1,000 moments. They're like a bag of tiny diamonds glittering in the black heart. Don't matter if they're real or things I made up. And I like that the movie included this because they were both holding on to each other, especially Inman holding on to the thought of Ada. And he acknowledges, like, the person I was holding on to, even though they were mostly fiction, mostly fantasy, like it still helped me and saved me, even though it was her, but it wasn't at the same time, so I like that they acknowledge that. And yeah, so that does make this a unique love story in some ways. Although, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of love stories maybe where the main characters, you're just like, they don't even know each other. What's going on? But it is like explicitly talked about in the movie, as I said. In the book, it's not explicitly talked about, but I don't think they needed to because we could gather that from the thoughts and the memories that we hear from Ada and Inman, the fact that they're kind of holding on to something that could be more fantasy than real. Also, the movie leaves out the fact that Ada was a bit older as far as, marrying age go. In the book, she was like mid to late 20s, which is old, old back then. And she had no interest in marriage. And when Inman would like approach her, she was just kind of, blasé and didn't really care. Whereas, up until a certain time, and then she starts to be more interested. But in the movie, it didn't say that she was past marrying age or anything, and she puts more of an effort in with Inman in the movie. But both book and movie have the scene where they have an interaction together before he leaves, and it just doesn't go smooth. And so Ada goes back to visit him before he leaves, and they end up kissing, and then he goes off to war. And similar, like in the book, when they are courting, they have a lot of awkward moments because Ada she feels like she's always just like responding in the wrong way. And same when Inman returns in the end, he and Ada have a lot of awkward moments once again where they're kind of getting used to each other. Because again, they hardly even knew each other, so they're trying to get a feel for it. Even though they've been waiting to be reunited for all this time, now that they're here, they're like, okay, like, what do I do here? But eventually they like find their groove and build that connection again. And then one of the nights, Ada slips into Inman's cabin, and then they end up having sex. And this scene I liked in the book because Ada is wearing pants because she and Ruby, when they went up to the mountains, it was just more practical to have pants on. And so she sneaks into his cabin and she's taking her pants off and she has like one leg in, one leg out. And then she's like tripping and stumbling over herself. And she's like, oh man, I wish I was wearing a dress because then it could just gracefully fall to my feet. Instead, it's like this awkward, embarrassing stumbling thing. And she looks at Inman and sees that he's looking at her and she's like, turn around. And he says, not for all the money in the Federation. And I like this because it just seems more realistic to have it be awkward and not have it be this steamy romance scene or something, but to have that realistic awkwardness, I guess. And then also the way Inman reacts, where she's embarrassed, but he's like not embarrassed for her. So he's not judging her for stumbling about in her pants, basically, I guess. But yeah, in the movie, they don't have that. They just get right to, the steamy scene. And then in the book, a line after this that I liked reads, and they did what lovers often do when they think the future stretches out endless before them, as bright as on the noon of creation day. They talk ceaselessly of the past, as if each must be caught up on each other's previous doings before they can move forward paired. And then as far as book or movie, this is a tough one. The movie stays so true to the novel, and it is just as interesting and engaging. And even though it follows the novel so closely, I was never bored because I knew it would happen. I was still so interested because it was just so well done. The cinematography is beautiful. It was shot in Romania, I believe, and it was gorgeous scenery. The acting is wonderful, and yeah, it was just so well done. And each of the casting, even the more minor characters, were spot on. And the book, though, as I said, it was just so eloquent and powerful and evocative. And he just writes in such a descriptive and unique way. And he can write a beautiful scene, wonderfully. But But then he can also write like more gruesome scenes really well too. And he just brings both sides of that to life. Whether, like Ada has a dream about her dad, which is kind of disturbing, I guess, maybe. I don't know. It's like his corpse, basically. And then obviously things Inman sees on the battlefield can be upsetting. And he writes them so powerfully while not being like over the top about it, So yeah, as much as I loved the movie, I think I will have to say the book wins on this one. Although, I don't know, it is a close one though, but the book gives more detail, as books always do. And oftentimes when it comes down to the wire between book or movie, I will often choose the book because I just love all the details we get in the book. But I understand that that's not really the movie's fault. Like a movie just can't give as many details as a book can, right? So I shouldn't hold it against the movie because they're just different mediums. Yeah, I don't know. The reading experience was really good, even though maybe it took me a while to be invested. But then the movie experience was really good too. Yeah, I don't know. This is really tough. I'm tempted to go with the book. Yeah, I guess for now I'll just say the book wins. But it's a close call. If you've read the book and seen the movie, I would love to know which one you prefer, because this is one of the tougher episodes I've done as far as choosing goes, because they're both so well done. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are. And yeah, that wraps it up on Cold Mountain. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. There were a number of details I left out, but if I left details out, then more often than not, in this episode at least, it's because they were so similar to book to movie. Like Ada's dad, who was played by Donald Sutherland, another big name. His scenes were very similar book to movie for the most part. So the movie really does follow the book very closely. And yeah, I would highly recommend both of them. And join me next week. I am going to be talking about The Tender Bar. I forget who wrote the book, but it's a memoir that was turned into a movie directed by George Clooney, starring Ben Affleck. So it's an Amazon movie. And yeah, so join me for that one. And I will see you next time. Bye.